part of the class itself. But in C, there is no provision in the structure to add the methods. But however, there is a provision in the classes in C++ world to add a method into the class itself. So that means essentially we are wrapping off the data, I mean the member variables and also the member function into a single unit, and that single unit is being called as a class. So essentially, the wrapping of the data and also the function into a single unit is being called as the encapsulation. And after this, so the member variable which has been defined within the class, so we can specify some access specifier. So what's the access specifier will be further discussed and come to this. That means we can build up some mechanism in which those data member variables may be exposed to the outside world or may not be exposed to the outside world. The third option is it may be exposed to only to the derived classes. So we will discuss what is meant by the derived classes here. So the second point, it is being telling that the data is not accessible to the outside world and only those functions which are being wrapped in the class can access it. So that means what it is trying to tell here is that, so let me write up a small program. So let's call this is a class which you have defined, and in this class, so let's call we have a access specifier called as the private here. Then we have defined something called as employee code. Then we have something defined called as employee name, and then we have defined something called as employee 6. Okay, this is what we have defined it over here. Then since it has been defined onto the private access specifier, so when the object of the class is going to be created, so through the object these data member will not be accessible. So what it is trying to tell here is that, so we can possibly create some functions here. So the first function which we have created something called as a input here. Then in the input we will write a bunch of cin and cout statement. Then finally we will write something called as a void display function, and in the display function we will just print the values which has been done here. So in the main function, then what we will do, we will just try to create a object of it. So we can write employee e here, the first object which you have created. So what this statement is trying to tell is that, so these are being hidden from the outside world. That means using the dot operator like e code, it cannot be accessible. Similarly, the e something called as e name, this also cannot be accessible. So then what to do? So if those are being the cannot be accessible, then what needs to be done? So in order to do that, what we need to do, we just need to write something called as the input here. This is what is the function that needs to be told, and this is also the display function that needs to be called up here. So am I clear what the PPT has been showed and what we have going to demonstrate it in the code? Is the point is clear to everyone? Do the point is clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, those who wanted to join outside of the KIT University email ID, they will not be allowed. Okay, so this is what has been written here. So this data is not possible to the outside world, and only those functions which are being wrapped in the class can access it. And we have seen that in the Excel in the one. So this is the function called as the input, and this is the function called as the display. So this is what has been wrapped within the employee classes itself, and this one is being explicitly making use of the member variable here. How? So I can write it something called as the cin, something called as e code, and then we can write something called as cin, then called as ename, then finally C in, then something called as E6. Okay, so similarly, then once the input has been successfully created, we can write something called as C out E code. Similarly, we can write C out, then E name. And then we can write it down simply C out called as ESEX. Okay, so that means where this function is being simply wrapping it up into the member variable. This is what is the point it is trying to tell here. Then move on to the third one. This function provides the interface between the object data and the program, and this insulation of the data from the direct access by the program is being called as the data hiding or the information hiding. So that means the third bullet point what it is trying to tell here is this one, the code which has been written over here. That means as soon as the object has been created for a specific class, and if those member variable are being defined or are being defined in such a way so that it should not be exposed to the outside world, then using the object and using the dot operator, those member variable cannot be accessed. This is what it is being, and this one is being called as the data hiding, or this is what has been called as a information hiding. Okay, then let's go to the last point. So the attributes wrapped into the class is called as the data member, and the function that operate onto the data are being called as the methods or the member function itself. Okay, so is the data encapsulation is clear to everyone? Is the data encapsulation is clear to everyone?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Okay, then we will go to inheritance. So inheritance is the process by which the object of one class acquire the properties of objects of another class. Okay, so let's understand what this means. So this means is that, so let's call you born from your parents. So they, let's call I born from my parent. So by default what has been happened is that my surname has been come due to my father and due to my mom. So let's call my surname is being Behera because my dad's surname was being Behera and my mom's surname was being Behera. That's why my surname by default has been added up into something like this. So if you go to South Indian side. So in the South Indian side, a girl before marriage, so her name will be started off with the father's name, and after marriage the name will be changed and the first name is going to be the husband name. Okay, so this is something which is being related to the inheritance. That means the objects of one classes are going to acquire the properties of the objects of another class itself. So it primarily support the concept of a hierarchical classification. So what's a hierarchical classification? So let's call you, then your father, then your grandfather, then your grandfather. So like this is a family tree, which is basically called as a family tree. So a family tree essentially follows a kind of a hierarchical classification. So each derived classes share common characteristics with the class from which it is being derived from. So that means if you look at some of the example what we are being seen here, assume that so this is a child class which is being inherited from a parent classes. So that means there will be some characteristics or there will be some feature which is being primarily aligned into the parent one. Then when the inheritance takes place, then the parent features is also being applicable to the child classes. And in addition to that, there will be specific to child features itself. For an example, so my dad has done an engineering in electrical engineering. In the similar fashion, I did my BTech in computer engineering. My dad did the MBA from Exim University, Bhubaneswar. So, but I did my MBA from IMT Ghaziabad. So these are the two characteristics that I have borrowed it from my parent. That means my BTech and then the MBA. Then on the top of it, so that means these are the parent feature which I have inherited it from my dad. Then what is my special feature, or that's called the child feature? My child feature, which is being exclusively to me, that I have done my PhD from IIM Ranchi. So in such a cases, my parent feature, which is being the BTech, and then the MBA. So that is what I have done it. That is what I have been inherited it. Then my child feature, which is being called as the PhD, that is what is being explicitly with me itself. So that is what. So each derived classes share some common characteristics with the class from it is being derived, and the primary benefit of the inheritance is being called as the code reusability. So that means we need to add some additional feature to an existing classes without modifying it itself. Okay, so let's understand what we are trying to do it here, or let's call the third point. Assume that, so let's call this is what has been given here, and now what we need to do, we need to create a, let's call key employee. A key employee is the one which we have created, and we are publicly getting inheriting from the employee here. Okay, so let's call this is one variable which we are going to create something called as a bool foreign visit. So let's call this is what is being called as a foreign visit here. Then what you will do, again I am going to write something called as a, let's call input. So let's call this is what is the input, and this is what is being the output which we are going to write it down. Okay, then what we will do, let's call this is what is being we have been defined here. So in this case what we will going to do is that, so this input function we will, so basically what will, when we are going to create the object of it, so this employee code, employee name, and the sex will be automatically available to the key employee. In addition to that, the foreign visit is also is a property which is also going to be applicable over here as well. So in this case what I will do is I will just simply write it down like this. Then on the top of it what I will do is I will simply call the function of this. So you may not need to understand the syntax at this point of time. So this is only just to demonstrate you is that when the key employee class has been inherited from the employee class, by default the employee code, employee name, and the employee sex is being automatically available to this function. So what we are trying to do, when any object is going to be created for the key employee, so let's call this is what I am going to create it.
Sir, the screen share this.
Oh, my screen share has gone. Okay, I'm just sharing it now again. Is it visible now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so what we have done is, so this is a key employee is a another class which you have created, and this is what has been getting inherited from the employee class. So in this, when we are going to inherit it from the employee class, what we mean to say here, by default the e code, the e name, and then the e sex will be automatically available to this class itself. So then what we will do is that when the input function which we are going to write, then initially we will be calling the parent input function. So similarly, when the display function will be called up here, what we are going to do, we are going to call up the parent one. So in this case I will just simply write it down, the display function here, that means the parent one, and then I will just simply write it down something called as this. Am I clear? Am I clear what I have written it now? So that means if I am going to call this function here, so let's call, these are the two functions which are going to call it now. Then what will happen when the input function will be called up? So first of all, this input function of the derived classes has been called. So eventually it will call up this method. Then finally, when the display function is being called up for the object of keyed employee, then this display function will be called up first, and then this the one which will be executed. So that means the point what we are trying to tell here is that, so once we created a derived class, whatever attributes of the base class is also going to be available to this. So is the point is clear to everyone? Is this point is clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is what is being nothing but the inheritance which we have talked of now. Now there is another example has been given here. So the bird is being a base class, then the flying bird and then the non-flying bird are the two derived classes. So the feathers and the lay eggs also being applicable over here, and this is also being applicable over here. And in addition to that, there will be some characteristics or some attribute which will be exclusively for the flying bird, and there will be some characteristics or the attribute which will be exclusively for the non-flying bird. And then these are the robin, then the swallow, then the penguin, and then the kiwi. So these are the again derived classes which are been inheriting from the flying bird and respective from the non-flying bird itself. Okay. So the next topic is being something called as the polymorphism. Okay, polymorphism is nothing but a Greek term. So it means is that it is the ability to take more than one form. Now let's understand what is meant by the polymorphism. So today, I mean, at this current age, you are playing the role of a son. Okay, so we are playing the role of a daughter. At the same time, you are also playing the role of a brother, or you are also playing the role of a sister. Now when you will become, let's call शादी का age हो जाएगा, so that means let's call you become close to 25 and 26, then your parent will force you to go for the marriage. Okay, so then in such a cases, after a couple of years of your marriage, then you will play the role of a dad, and also you are going to play the role of a mom. Then when your son or the daughters get older, then and once their marriage also has been happened, then you both of you, then you are either going to play the role of a grandpa, or you are going to play the role of a grandma. So that means a single person at a different point of time or at a same point of time is going to play the multiple roles. So that is what it is being called as a polymorphism. So that means the ability to take more than one form itself. Now let's look at it with a simple example. So an operation may exhibit a different behavior in different instances, and the behavior is basically depend on the type of the data which is being used in the operations. So now let's understand the point number 2. So to understand the point number 2, so let's call, suppose we are going to write C out something, let's call 2 plus 3. So when we execute, what value it will print?
5.
When we 5. When we write something called as when we run the second one, what it will do? What it will print? So the first one is going to be 5. Then the second one where it will write to print. So what it will flush, or what operation it is expected to carry out? So when we have written here, what operation is expected to carry out?
Addition.
Addition.
Concatenation.
Concatenation in this case.
Concatenation, right? So in this case, what will be the output? The output will be, hi, I am doing fine, isn't it? So that means in this case we have used the plus operator for the summation, and here also we have used the plus operator for the concatenation. So that means this operator at the same time is being playing a dual role. Okay, that means in this case it is doing the addition, and in this case it is doing the concatenation. That means it is combining the two string itself. So that is what it is being called as a polymorphism. So is this clear what is meant by the polymorphism? Am I clear what is meant by the polymorphism?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Is it clear? Okay. Now we will take another. This is the same example which have been. So now let's consider this case itself. So let's call this is one of you. So if this is one of you, then in the shopping mall, when you will be visiting, so as soon as you come back to KIT University or the KIT campus, then you will be visiting to the shopping mall, nearby shopping mall to the KIT University. Then when you will be in the shopping mall, you will behave like a customer. Then in the bus you will be behave like a passenger, or in a flight you will be behave like a passenger, and in the school you will be behave like a student. So that means in the school of computer engineering you will be behave like a student. You will not be sitting on the top of our head. Okay, then at home you will be behave like a son. So in case of the girl one, then you will be behave like a daughter. So that means this person, okay, is being playing the multiple roles, and then hence this concept is being called as a polymorphism. Then we will do something called as a binding. Okay, so binding is primarily refers to the linking of a procedure or the linking of a function to the code to be executed in response to the call itself. Okay, now let's understand that what is meant by the binding here. So let's call the employee code which has been created here. Okay, the employee code has been created here. So that means when we are going to call the function, this is what is been called as a binding. So that means using the object we are going to bind it to a function which is going to be called up, and this binding is being called as something called as a static binding. Okay, because this is a static binding, so that is what it has been mentioned here. So this binding which is going to happen at the compile time, that is what is been called as a static binding, and the binding which is going to happen at the runtime, this is what is been called as a dynamic binding itself. Am I clear? The static binding, is it clear to all of you? Is the static binding is clear to all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now let's look at another example here. So in this case, suppose you have told that called E is equal to K of E. This is what we can write it down. We have created a kit employee KE, then we have assigned E is equal to KE. Then I can simply run it by simply write these two things, isn't it? So I can simply write it by with this. So in this case, which function is expected to run? So my E currently it was pointing to the base class, but we have changed the references here. So this E, instead of holding the object of a base class, this is what is being holding the object of a derived class. Okay, then using the base class object declaration, but actually it is holding the address of a derived class. Then we are just simply calling the input here, and just we are calling the display function over here. Is it clear? That means, so we will be look at it out the syntax to create, to determine that which function is going to be called during the runtime. That is what is being called as a dynamic binding. So is the concept is clear to everyone? This is what is being demonstrating as a static binding, and this is what we'll be demonstrating as a dynamic binding. Am I clear? Is the concept is clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, this dynamic binding or the late binding mean that the code associated with a given procedure call is not known until the time of the call at the runtime. So that means the dynamic binding is being also called as a late binding, and to which function it has to be called up, that is not known during the compile time. Only when the code has been successfully run, then only during the runtime it will be decided. So that is why it is what has been called as a late binding. So similarly, the static binding is being called as the early binding. Then the dynamic binding is being called as the late binding. These are the some of the alternative by which it has been come across. Then the concept of the binding is being primarily associated with the concept of polymorphism and also with the inheritance. That means the concept of the binding is primarily work in conjunction with the concept of polymorphism and also with the concept of a inheritance. So that means the example which I have demonstrated you in the notepad itself, that is what has been following of a inheritance structure. Okay. Then message passing. What is a message passing? All of you know what is being the a method calls. So let's call in C. You might have created multiple functions, and those functions which are going to be calling each other. So that means the calling the each other means is that a function is being possibly supplying some values into another function. That function is being taking the arguments, then computing something, and based on the computation, based on the logic which has been defined, then it is appropriately returning something. That is what is being called as a message passing. So in the context of C++, so it is a process of invoking an operation on an object. That means, so this message passing is something called as like this. So basically using the object, we are invoking a function. So right now it is not taking any argument, but we can also write something which is also going to take some arguments here. Then object communicate with each other by sending and receiving information. So that means what is meant by the sending? Sending means let's call some parameters here. So let's call, I can take the input of the E code and name here, and this is what we can do it. So let's call, suppose I wanted to modify this. Suppose we wanted to modify this, then what I can write? I can write something called as the code here, and then I can write something called as string name here. Then we can write something called as a character 6 here. So these are the three things which we are taking. So then after that, what we will do? We can simply write E code is equal to code. Then we can simply write as E name is equal to name, and then something called as E6 is equal to 6 here. Okay, now this is what I have written here. Similarly, the display function is going to be here. Now in the main function, what we will do? So we have created an object here. So in this case, what we will do? We will write something called as cin. You give me the value. So in this case, I can write something called as something which you have created here. Then we will write something called as cin E code here. Then similarly, we can do ename, and then we can simply write E6 here. Then using the object like E dot input, we can pass on the value something like this. So let's call E code here, then ename, and then something called as e6 here. Okay, that means this is what is the way we are being passing the messages in between these two. Am I clear? So is this being clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so similarly, what it is trying to tell? So a message for an object is a request for the execution of a function. The receiving object will invoke a function and it is going to generate some result here. And the message passing is basically involved in specifying the name of the object, then the name of the function, and then the information to be sent here. So that means in this example, the student is nothing but an object. This set data is nothing but the name of the function which will be primarily used for the message passing, and then the id and the name which are nothing but the argument to the function. So these are being considered as the information which needs to be sent to the object itself. Okay, so is the message passaging clear? Message passing is clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Okay, then we will study something called as a overloading. So the overloading is one type of polymorphism. So what is polymorphism? It is called as the ability to take more than one form. So the overloading is also being another way by which it is going to take ability of multiple roles here. So it allows an object to have different meaning and depending on its context. So that means when an existing operator or a function begins to operate on a new data type or a class, it understood to be overloaded. So that means the plus function which you have seen there, so that means the plus function is being used as a multiple context. So in case of a numeric one, it is going to treat it like a summation, and in case of a string, it is what is going to be treated like treated like a what it is going to be treated like in case of a string?
Concatenate.
Concatenation, isn't it? So a more generic name is being given as a operate as a overloading. So the process of making an operator to exhibit different behavior in different instance is being known as a operator overloading. For an example, the 3 plus 5 is equals to 8, and then the hello plus world is being considered as a hello world itself. Okay, so similarly, when a single function name is being used to perform different type of task, it is what is being called as a function overloading. So that means let's understand this example. So we have discussed something called as the operator overloading, which is we have demonstrated in a polymorphism. So similarly, let's understand what is meant by the function overloading. So a function overloading means is what? So currently, so let's call, we are going to write something like this. So let's call integer sum. Then in this case, let's call integer a and integer b. This is what it is going to return. Then we can write the same the function name with something called as a like this. Okay, so that means in this case what is going to happen? So we have written something which is going to take a float value. This is what is going to take a float value, and this is what is also going to take a float value, and in turns it can also return a float value. So that means in this case this function called as the sum here, it has been overloaded. That means currently in the first instances it is what has been specifically used for the addition of the two numbers, and which without having any fractional part. And in the second function, so this the same function name is being used, but instead in this case the three arguments are being getting added up, and in turns it is returning a float value. That means it is a summation of two numbers without having fractional values. Then this function is being a summation of three numbers with the fractional values, and hence when the same function name is being used, this concept is being called as the function overloading. Am I clear? Is this clear on what is meant by the function overloading? Is this clear on what is meant by function overloading?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, now this is what has been a simple demonstration has been done here. Then the next one is, what are the advantages of OOP? Okay, so let's understand with the advantages of true. Through inheritance, redundant code is eliminated and extend the use of existing classes. So this is what we have discussed it in case of a inheritance. So that means, so by default, if any class is going to be inherited from the base class, subsequently the characteristics or the attributes of the base class will be automatically get inherited into the derived class. Then the principle of the data hiding is going to help the programmer to build the secure program. Okay, for an example, so if you define something and which is being under the private access specifier, then those member variable which was being defined within the private access specifier cannot be accessed from the outside world. That means by creating an object, one cannot use the dot operator to assign some values or to read some values. But however, those operations can be performed by creating a member function within the class. That means by wrapping of a function within the class itself. Then the third one, the message passing technique for communication between the objects makes the interface description with external system much simpler. That means the inter-object message communication is going to be helpful for building of a simple system. The next one is, multiple instances of an object can coexist without any interference and can be easily managed here. So that means multiple instances of an object. So let's call, in this case, the one which have been written here. So I let me create something called as a 15 here. So that means what we are going to do is that, so there are how many objects have been created here. That means an array of objects has been created here. So my first object is going to be at the index 0. So which will be treated as E0, then E1, then E2, then E3, then E4 up to E15. That means a bunch of object also can be created, something like this. Then easily upgradable from small system into a larger system. That means if your requirements are being getting improved, or the requirement is becoming, getting enhanced, then initially you might have thought of writing a class with simple characteristics or the simple attribute, then using the principle of the inheritance, then in the derived class we can capture as many as number of arguments. So that means, or as many as number of parameters or attributes. So in such a cases, we can easily create a smaller program into a larger program itself. So that is what it is, what has been told now. Okay. So with this, we are done with the first chapter. So in the first chapter, what we have done, so we have just gone through some of the introductory aspect into the object-oriented programming world. And in this case, what we did is that we have just gone through some of the definitions of it. And for a better explanation of the definition, we have also written some of the a code snippet there. Okay, so this is what it's all about. The question, this is all about the chapter number 1. Okay, so can we start the chapter 2 or in the next class? Can we start the chapter 2 from now onwards, or we will start it in the next class?
So next class it
So
will be.
next class.
Next class.
The next class.
Next class.
Okay. What is preventing you to start it in the current class? What is preventing you to start in today's class? Why not today? Why in the future? Tell me one of the reason. Why?
Sir, because of the so we have to make notes as well as the it will be good to
Sir, we will revise the previous one for that.
Okay, you wanted to revise the previous one. Okay, your revision is going to happen while you are at home, not attending the classes, isn't it? So all of you received the physical copy or the e-book. Which one you have received?
E-book, sir.
E-book all of you have received, right?
e-books, sir.
Isn't it? E-book you have received it. Then as soon as the class is being over, then you can also revise. It is not necessary that once the subject or a module has been successfully completed, then only we need to revise. Are we doing this? I mean, when a chapter is completed, then only you are starting the revision. Okay, your class response is not good. What am I supposed to do by which the class response will be good? One of you please tell me. What am I supposed to do by which the class response will be good? What am I supposed to do? Or tell me, or please do a favor, what am I lacking by which the class participation has to go off? What is that I need to improve upon? Or what is the area that I am currently lacking? You please give me a feedback on this. No feedback? Very good. So the time is 1:45 now. Let me take the attendance first. The first time I am taking your attendance, correct?
Yes, sir.
The first time I am taking your attendance, right?
Yes, sir.
No, sir, you have taken it before once.
Not for the lab, for the theory class. I am talking about from the theory class.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can we do a quiz today? Can we do a quiz now? Okay, no answer means I will do it. Okay, let me do this after the class. Roll number 1, 101,
Sir,
119, 148,
present, sir.
165,
Present, sir.
okay, 168, 205, 207, 213, 227, 229,
Present, sir.
294,
Present, sir.
318,
Present, sir.
320,
Present, sir.
350, 353,
Present, sir.
479,
Present, sir.
491,
Present, sir.
567,
Yes, sir.
575, 651,
Present, sir.
660,
Present, sir.
678, 798,
Present, sir.
809,
Present, sir.
811, 814,
814 present, sir.
815,
Present, sir.
817,
Present, sir.
825,
Present, sir.
832, 853, 895,
Present, sir.
936, 939,
Present, sir.
957, 959,
Present, sir.
960,
Present, sir.
992,
Present, sir.
1026,
Yes, sir.
1058,
Present, sir.
1111,
Present, sir.
1134,
Present, sir.
1206,
Present, sir.
1235,
Present, sir.
1246, 1253,
Present, sir.
1268,
The 53 present.
1268,
Present, sir.
1315,
Present, sir.
1348,
Present, sir.
1397,
Present, sir.
1399,
Present, sir.
1427,
Present, sir.
1434,
Present, sir.
1467,
Present, sir.
1539,
Present, sir.
1603,
Present, sir.
1663,
Present, sir.
1673,
Present, sir.
1883,
Present, sir.
1885,
Present, sir.
1910, 1939,
Present, sir.
1985,
Present, sir.
2005,
Present, sir.
2072, 2110,
Present, sir.
2129,
Present, sir.
2187,
Present, sir.
2253,
Present, sir.
2270, okay, 2460,
Present, sir.
2516,
Present, sir.
2532,
Present, sir.
2540,
Present, sir.
2680,
Present, sir.
2700,
Present, sir.
2865,
Attending, sir.
2932, okay, then 3469,
Yes, sir.
Sir, 957 also present, sir. Internet issues.
Sir,
950,
213, sir. Sir, 213.
957.
there is no 957.
Sir, there.
Sir, 1246.
Pushkar. Yes. Down, sir. Down.
Sir, 213, sir.
957,
Yes.
done.
Yes.
Okay, who else?
213, sir. 213.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
Sir, 853 wrote in chat. He's present.
what is present?
Yes, sir. He's written in chat. Dipanj.
Okay, done.
1246.
Okay, let me tell you one thing. Okay, the moment I am calling out the roll numbers, if you are not responding, then going forward, I will not not mark you present. Okay, many times it has been seen that the students are citing internet issues, but they are not attending the classes. Okay, this is the first time and the last time I'm going to give the attendance to those students who were not responding when I'm calling out their roll numbers. From the next class onwards, if you forgot intentionally or unintentionally and missed out responding, then I will not be again going through the list. Okay, because to take a attendance, it has been taken my 8 minutes of time. Okay, I going forward since we have been successfully completed the chapter, so that's why I was able to spend time. But going forward, I will not have time to spend more than 5 minutes in taking the attendance. So, am I clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Which roll number I missed out? There is only one student, right? What's your roll number?
Sir, 2270.
1246.
2270.
Yes, sir.
Okay, done.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, 1246. Yes, sir.
Okay, done. So time is 1:54 now. Okay, I'm done with the class. Okay, if those who are being, I mean, I'm done. If you have any questions, then we can sing. Otherwise, those who do not have any questions, they can leave. Okay, but going forward, we will not be leaving the class. Okay, before. So we will